And so it's been a combination, I think, of those two factors. It's been the success in reaching out to religious voters that has kind of started to change the minds, although this is an ongoing debate of the political class on the left, but also the willingness of religious Democrats to really own their faith in a way that they haven't for a few decades, and to embrace it and to demand that their party pay attention to it for once. That is going to make 2008 an extremely interesting year. We're seeing the conventional wisdom we've had about politics just thrown upside down. And it's really anybody's guess what's going to happen in November. But I promise you it will be interesting to watch. Thank you.
Amy wanted to spend most of the time talking with you and taking questions and hearing what you have to say. So anybody want to start?
Well, thank you. One of my own thinking about re-entering the left and religion occurred at the moment where the bishops called for civil disobedience against the proposed Republican immigration law that would render hospitality criminal. They had protests that broke out in a number of cities, and from that moment, Republican claim to control the religious interface unraveled a bit. And I was wondering, in 2008, how do you see the crosscuts of religion and immigration playing a role? What seems to be on the horizon?
That's a good question. It's really, you're right, that was a wake-up call, both for a lot of Catholics, but also, I think, for people in the Republican Party, who are starting to realize that they're in real trouble, that one of the things that happens when a religious community aligns itself only with one party is that they cease to be heard on many of the issues that matter to them. If you decide, well, abortion is the only issue we're going to vote on, then Republicans have no reason to listen to you when it comes to immigration, because they assume you're not going anywhere. And if Democrats assume they can't get you, they're not going to listen to you either. So one of the things that's happening is not just with Catholics, but with a lot of religious groups. They're starting to put themselves into play and say, well, we have no more interest in being taken for granted by Democrats than we did being taken for granted by Republicans. But we're going to be in the middle and not align ourselves and demand that they listen to us on both those issues, or on all of our issues. And immigration is definitely one where I think they're speaking to both sides. Certainly we're seeing a shift among Hispanic Catholics. And that's where I think that's going to be the biggest change from the last two presidential cycles, is Democrats had almost gotten to a point as well where they were kind of writing off Hispanics. Well, Republicans are going to get most of them, in part because they assumed that Catholicism would tie them to the Republican Party. And so it hasn't become an issue as much that's been discussed in the primaries the way that it was in the Republican primaries. But I think it's likely to be a very big dividing line in the general election.
Thank you so much. Congratulations.
Thank you.
There's some historic antecedents as I read your book. I felt that, and I just learned recently myself, that there's no religious freedom mentioned in the Declaration, there's nothing mentioned in the Constitution, the laws, and the Bill of Rights. So actually the Founding Fathers, they had other issues that were hidden and not mentioned, for instance, like slavery and the major Indian problem of westward migration in terms of slave versus free. And so religion never really surfaced. They tried to stay away from it because they didn't want what had happened in New York. I mean, that's why they established the country it was. And it wasn't. I was so enthralled because when you set up this premise, the foundation that Franklin Roosevelt set up for the Democratic Party came to mind. There's a recent book which you probably haven't had time to read, but it's FDR by John Edward Smith, and he showed how he took the religious aspects of Tammany and the fact that he had polio living in Warm Springs. He learned the religious.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, I do have a question. point is that how do you feel that now in this context today, the two hidden items are religion is politics and politics is religion. And the second issue today in our current time is really immigration as it plays into the larger political fabric. Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think one of the arguments I've tried to make is that, regardless of what faith or no faith people are, and regardless of what their political affiliation is, I think it's good for everyone if religion can be less of a politically divisive topic that's kind of used purely for political purposes to divide the electorate. And although it's somewhat counterintuitive, that it will require Democrats to really engage religion and religious voters in order to take it off the table. So in other words, if one party in a country, again, that has 88% of the electorate who say religion's important to them, if just one party is seen as being religious, they're going to have an automatic advantage there. One of my colleagues has called it leveling the playing field, is what Democrats need to do. And I love that phrase so much that I keep stealing it from him. But that's absolutely, I think, the end point here is not for Democrats to become the religion party any more than Republicans should be the religion party, but to level the playing field so that religion can no longer be used as something that people line up, well, I'm voting for so-and-so because he's a man of faith and she's obviously the Antichrist. To be able to take that off the table, because all of the other issues that people of faith, but all voters care about, get subsumed when we spend all of our time fighting about religion, and particularly about pitched battles that, just to take abortion as an example, I know that's the one thing that has really been most divisive over the last 35 years, and it's the issue people bring up over and over of, well, this is all well and good, but can you really, so long as Democrats have the position they do with abortion, can you really win over religious voters? To which I say yes, for several reasons. One, a third of Democratic voters are already pro-life. So it's not as if pro-life voters all say, well, abortion is the only thing that matters to me, and I refuse to side with the party that doesn't want to outlaw abortion. The second thing is that not all pro-life voters think that's the best way to reduce the abortion rate. They've watched what's happened over the last 15 or 20 years. They've watched the strategy of lining up very small but politically difficult votes for Democrats to try to paint them into a corner. But things like the so-called partial birth abortion ban, parental notification laws, we now know have very little impact on the abortion rate. If you line up all of those, you're talking about a few percentage point decreases in the abortion rate. Whereas there are some new Catholic Democrats, pro-choice and pro-life, both in the House of Representatives, who have proposed legislation focused on reducing the abortion rate by preventing unwanted pregnancies in the first place, which we've already seen with teen pregnancy is an extremely effective way of lowering the abortion rate. That's dropped by over 33% in the last 15 years. But also marrying that with an approach that provides support for women who are pregnant and want to have their babies. That's something Democrats haven't talked about for a long time. And that turns out to be something that really appeals to a lot of pro-life voters and gets them to the point where they can say, well, it's not necessarily pro-life for me to side with Republicans over Democrats, because this is a pro-life approach as well. And so, I think we are getting to the point, and particularly if both parties are kind of acknowledging religious voters and their concerns, where we can finally say, well, religion becomes less of a political issue, and we can move that to the side and focus on healthcare and the war and education and the things that voters, if you ask them what their priorities are, those are all the top priorities, and abortion and gay marriage fall very, very far down on the list.